Hello there, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today on the minimum wage check in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan. I'm your host and presenter for this session, and we are joined in the background by my colleague Calvin, who is standing by ready to answer your questions. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So we'll start with a very brief introduction to national minimum and living wage legislation, and we'll run through the current rates of pay. And then we're going to move into a product demo. So I'm going to show you how to set up the minimum wage check in Sage 50 Payroll, which you can use for your hourly paid staff. And we're going to process some minimum wage employees, running through various scenarios where you'll be prompted to make adjustments to the pay when they're being paid less than the minimum wage. And then we've got a bit of a knowledge check. We've got a quiz lined up towards the end. So just a few questions on what we've covered today, which you can join in should you wish to. And then I'll run through further support, and we will stick around to make sure that we have covered off any questions that have been asked. So moving straight on to national minimum or living wage legislation, and let's first explain the difference between those two terms. So the national minimum wage is the minimum pay per hour that employees are entitled to receive, whereas the national living wage is a slightly higher minimum wage, which is for employees who are aged 23 or over. So they're both the minimum rates of pay that employees need to receive per hour. That's any employee above school leaving age. And if they happen to be 23 or older, they get what's known as the national living wage, which is a slightly higher rate of pay than those given to younger employees. So speaking of those rates of pay, these are the current minimum and living wage rates, and these took effect from April 2023. Now for employees aged 23 and over, national living wage employees, they should get a minimum of £10.42 per hour. Employees aged 21 to 22 should get £10.18 per hour. 18 to 20s are on £7.49 per hour minimum, and then under 18s and apprentices on £5.28 per hour as their minimum wage. Now that apprentice rate applies to all apprentices within their first year, and for apprentices aged over 19, it only applies to the first year. If they're under 19, the apprenticeship rate can be paid moving into the second year of apprenticeship onwards. But for those that are aged over 19, they would get the minimum wage according to their age after that first year of apprenticeship. Now, for more details on what types of pay you should include in minimum wage and which particular employees may be excluded from it, we would suggest that you read up on the gov.uk or ACAS website. Some of the legislation can get a little bit involved, and we don't have time to run through that today. But I am going to share a quick tip at this point and show you where you can find these minimum wage rates within Sage 50 Payroll. So if I just bring the slides down, and I'm logged into my payroll, and if I go to the company tasks here on the left-hand side and then go into legislation, you'll see the legislation settings for your current tax year. So in our case, it's 23 to 24. And if I click onto minimum wage, this is where you can easily check the minimum hourly rates for the various different age ranges and also the apprenticeship rate. So these legislation settings are actually used by the minimum wage check if you have hourly paid employees. But if you need a quick reminder of what the minimum hourly rates are, this is a place that you can check at any time. Now, for those of you that follow the news, there has been an announcement on minimum wage in 2024. So the Chancellor has confirmed that they will be hitting the target of 2/3 of average pay from next April. So the national living wage will be above £11. We'll know the exact amounts once that's announced, I believe, in November. And there's also going to be a change to the age that minimum living wage will be payable. So that is actually reducing to 21 from next year, from April 2024. It's planned to reduce to that. So they would all get what the new living wage will be at that point, so anyone aged 21 or above. But we'll keep you updated on any of those changes in our payroll year-end webinars and also in our online help centre. So that's your legislation side. What we're now going to do is we're going to dive into the programme and we're going to show you this minimum wage check feature. Now, first thing I would say is this can only be used for hourly paid employees. So if you have employees that get a fixed salary, either per week or per month, it is still down to you to manually calculate what the equivalent hourly rate would be and to ensure that that fixed salary is above the minimum wage for that particular employee. But if you do pay hourly, if you pay with hourly rates, the good news is you can use this minimum wage check in order to verify that your employees are receiving their minimum wage. It's especially useful for those younger employees where they're changing bands as they move up through the different pay rates. So a couple of steps are involved in the setup, which I'm going to run through in a demo in just a moment. So the first step is to set up your pay elements to be included in minimum or living wage calculations. And then the second step is to apply the minimum or living wage check to the relevant employees. So we'll show you how that all works. If I just bring these slides down once again. And first thing I'm going to go into is our pay element settings. So we're going to stay on the company tasks here on the left-hand side. And then this time I'm going to click pay elements. You'll see for this demo that I have 4 payments set up. You've probably got a lot more. And many of these are hourly payments, but some of them do form part of my hourly paid employees' pay. So we've got things like commission, which itself is a fixed payment, but it can be included in the wages earned by a minimum wage employee. So just to show you the settings of my basic hourly pay element, I'm going to click edit. You'll see I've set it as a variable payment. Now this means that it's possible to alter the rate of pay within the enter payment screen. And it also means that the minimum wage check will be able to do automatic adjustments to the rate of pay. And then in the settings towards the bottom here, you'll see that we've got this included in the minimum or living wage calculation. And we've included both the value of the payment and the hours that have been worked. So with this being an hourly payment, it's going to use this as the number of hours worked, and then all payments where the value is included in minimum wage will be used to work out and verify if they're being paid at least the minimum for their age group. And we've got some default values entered. We've got the current living wage as the default rate, but that can be amended at employee level, and that is something that I've done to show you this feature in use. Next one we'll take a look at is an overtime payment. So if I edit the settings for this one, it's been set up as a factored payment. So what this means is the system works out the hourly rate, and that is linked back to the basic pay. So overtime in this instance is paid at 1.5 times base payment rate, which is the basic pay. And this means that the payment includes a premium element, which would need to be disregarded in minimum wage calculations. So if you do have any factored payments, there are 3 tick boxes available. And for this one, we're including the value, the hours, and the fact that it includes a premium element. And that'll all be thrown into the mix when it does the calculation. Third one I've got here is a commission payment. So some of my employees are commission based, also hourly paid, but the commission forms part of their wage. And because it's not an hourly payment, it doesn't represent an hour worked. We're not including the hours in the calculation, but we are including the value. And again, this is a variable payment. And I've got one additional payment, which I've called minimum wage top up. And we're going to use this later on in the demo to top up an employee's pay where they are not on minimum wage. So this one again isn't going to represent an hour's worked, but we are going to use the value of this payment to be included in the minimum wage check. Now, there are similar settings for deductions, which are less used, but if you create a deduction, you can include that in the value or hours for minimum or living wage calculation. So if, for example, you had a payment for unpaid hours or unpaid leave, they've taken a number of hours of unpaid leave and you for some reason set that up as a deduction, you could include that in the minimum wage check as well. But not very common that deductions are included. So those are my pay element settings, and a quick tip before we move on, if you want a quick way of checking pay element settings, maybe you've got a lot larger list of payments than I have, there is a report you can run. So if you go into this main reports option here at the top and go to the company section on the left hand side, there is a payment types report. So this one just here, payment types. And then you can see at a glance, if I just zoom in very slightly, you can see which of your payments are included in minimum wage check. So these two are hours and rate. These two are just the amount. We have our premium element as well. So that's another quick way you could check that your pay elements are set up correctly. So that was step one. Step two was then to apply the minimum or living wage check. So two ways you can do this. You can either do it directly in an employee record. So if I go into this first employee and click the employment tab, I can come down here to pay elements. And then you'll see there's a checkbox right at the bottom where we can apply the minimum wage check to that employee. So you could work through each of your employees that you want to use this for, ticking the box within their pay elements. Or you could use global changes. Because I want to include all of my employees in the minimum wage, I'm actually going to select the rest of my employees all in one go. And then to get into global changes, I can go to tasks, global changes, go to the payments option. And from here, you can set the apply minimum wage flag. So that will then set it for the 4 selected employees in this case. And click yes to proceed. And you can see those 4 employees have now been updated. So that's everything set up. Before we go into the processing demo, I just want to show you one other report. So if you are using the minimum wage check, there's a minimum wage employees report. You find it in the employee folder. I've added it to my favorites, but it's here within employee, minimum wage employees report. And what this one shows you is for any employee that's included in the minimum wage check, it shows you their date of birth, their age, and which of the minimum wage bands they fall into. So I've got an apprentice, 21 to 22, but most of them are 23 and older, and they would fall into the living wage category, where they get that £10.42 per hour. So that is the setup complete. Quick recap of the 2 steps, nice and straightforward. Step 1, set up your pay elements. And then step 2 was to apply the check. And if you don't want to do it individually, you've just seen there, you can do it using global changes. So next up, we are going to process our minimum wage employees. And this is where the check will be done when you enter the payments. And if an employee is found to be being paid below their minimum wage, you will see a prompt, much like the prompt that you can see here in the screenshot, asking you to adjust a payment. Now, this only works for variable payments. If you've set them up as fixed payments, you still get a prompt, but you will need to adjust the rate of pay in the employee record for a fixed payment. But if it is variable, you can do an automatic adjustment by clicking the adjust button. And there's a note there as well. You can set your default rates in the employee record and pay element settings, and that's something you might consider doing when there has been an increase to minimum wage rates, or if someone's moved up the age bands. So we'll try and point all of that out as we go through this next demo. So for this one, I'm going to return to my payroll tasks. We're going to go into one employee at a time. So we've put together a few different scenarios where the minimum wage check is going to come into play. All of these staff are paid weekly and they're paid with hourly rates. So my next pay date is this Friday. And starting with our first employee, they're a regular employee. If I just show you in their employee record, they're 42 years old. So they should be getting the national living wage. And if I go into the enter payment screen, we've got them working 40 hours at £10.42. And when I go to save their payments, we'll see that nothing's been triggered. They are indeed being paid their minimum wage. Now, if that wasn't the case, let's say we try to pay them £10.40 an hour. We go to save the payments. You'll see at this point, we're being prompted that they're being paid less. So it's done that calculation. It's looked at the hours worked, total pay, divided one by the other, and it's then prompting us to make an adjustment to basic. And if you click adjust, you can see there it's moved that £10.40 back up to £10.42. So that's how it works in its simplest form, with just one pay element, and we can see there that we are correctly paying the minimum wage. So we'll move on to the next employee, and for this one we're going to bring some overtime into the mix. Now, because overtime has a premium element, when you work out the minimum wage, you need to disregard that premium amount. So at time and a half, the and a half part of that payment wouldn't be included in the check. So let's go into enter payments again for this next employee. And you can see for this one, 40 hours of basic pay at £10 an hour, 10 hours of overtime at time and a half, which is being worked out at £15 per hour. Now, before I save these payments, and this employee is also over 23, but before I save the payments, let's do a quick calculation. So total pay is £550. And we can see they've worked 50 hours this week. So you can probably do this in your head, but hourly rate on average is coming out at £11 per hour. And that seems to be above the national minimum wage in this scenario. But when we go to check it, when I click save/next, you'll see that we are still being prompted to make an adjustment. And the reason for that is we can't include the premium element in that calculation. So which payment can we adjust? The only adjustable payment is basic. That's our only variable payment. So I'm going to click on to adjust, and you can see it's popped up the basic rate to £10.42, and the overtime rate has increased accordingly because it's linked to the base rate, and that is now at £15.63. So this is the gross pay in total now, and the hourly rate excluding the premium element is now the minimum wage. So this is what this employee should be paid in this particular scenario. So the next one that we've set up here is an employee who has a birthday coming up. In fact, they might have just had their birthday. If we have a look in the employee record, we can see the date of birth. It's the 2nd of October 2002. So they have just turned 21, which moves them up into the 21 to 22 age bracket. Now, this also means that we need to set them a different national insurance category, because previously they were on category M, being between 60 and 20. So I'm just going to make a change to the NI category and put them onto standard rate. And currently we are paying the minimum wage. And when we go into the enter payment screen, you can see it's still that £7.49, which is what we would pay to employees 18 to 20. Now, if we're trying to save this, if I click save/next, we are being prompted to adjust the basic because we've moved into the next pay reference period after their birthday. And if I click on to adjust, that has put them up to £10.18 per hour. And that would be their new hourly rate from this period onwards. Now, with this one, I am going to change the default rate as well for this particular employee. So if you go into the employee record, onto the employment tab, and then come down here into pay elements, you can see the default rate is set to the £7.49. So let's put that up to £10.18. And that will now be their new default amount moving forward. But because we've done an adjustment this period, what we will find next period is we either need to reset the payments or we need to overtype the rate and enter payments to match its new default. But we'll see that a little bit later on in the demo. Okay, so two more employees I'm going to show you. This next one is a commission-based employee, so they get a basic hourly rate with commission on top, and we expect that the commission would cover at least minimum wage, but maybe it won't. Let's have a look. So we go into the enter payment screen. It's another 23 or older, this employee. So we've got 40 hours at £8.50 is what they're getting as their basic hourly rate. And commission this month, we're going to put in at £100. So if I bring that calculator back up, total pay this period is 440. Hours worked is the 40, because remember, commission isn't an hourly payment. We can see here, average hourly rate here is £11 an hour. If I save these payments, you can see that that hasn't triggered an alert. But let's change up the scenario. Let's say their commission wasn't quite as high as we hoped, and they're just getting £50. So total pay is now 390. And if I click onto save/next, you can see that they are being paid less than minimum wage. And it is giving us the opportunity to either adjust the basic pay or the commission. So we could choose one of those pay elements to adjust. So we could just increase the basic hourly rate, or we could increase the amount of commission they've earned. But I want to show this slightly differently on the pay slip. So I'm just going to cancel out of this screen, and I'm going to add this top-up payment as an additional payment line, just so it's clear to the employee that I'm still paying them a basic hourly rate. This is the commission they earned. I've entered 1 as the hours or number for minimum wage, but this time I can use that as the top-up payment. So the extra pay that I'm given in this period to make sure they're being paid minimum wage is £26.80. And just to check that on the calculator for you, £416.80 divided by the 40 hours worked is your £10.42. So for this employee, we've given them a bit extra to keep them on minimum wage. And last but not least, we have an apprentice. So for the system to recognise that they are an apprentice and they should be paid apprenticeship rate, you do need to enter apprenticeship details into the employee record, which you'll find here on the employment tab. So they've been an apprentice since the 10th of October last year. So it's coming up to a year, not quite a year at this point, and the employee is age 22. So at this stage, they're entitled to the apprentice rate, but once they've done their first year of apprenticeship, because they're over 19, they will then be entitled to the minimum wage for their particular age. They're under 19, they can still be paid the apprenticeship rate. So let's go into enter payments for this one. £5.28 is the apprenticeship rate, and we can happily save that, and that is still a valid minimum wage for this employee. So you've seen there a number of the adjustments that can be made automatically in this case because we've got variable payments. I'm just going to complete the pay run for this period by updating the records. And I just want to quickly show you what happens when we do the same thing next week, because we did do a couple of adjustments in that last demo. So let's go back into enter payments. We've got this first employee up, and can you see the rate has been retained as £10.40, because when you do an automatic adjustment, it doesn't save that new amount for next time. It does go back to what you'd originally entered. So for this one, I do need to set it to £10.42, and that will now be retained next week when we pay this employee. Similarly, for this particular employee, we've got them down as £10 an hour, which we know is below the minimum wage. So if I go back into their employee record, I'm just going to set their default to what it should be, £10.42. And that has now fed through to the enter payment screen. So we know that that employee is now getting minimum wage. Same with this one, should be on £10.18 now. So we've already done the default. We're going to keep them on that. And let's just say for this employee, they've earned slightly more commission, £75 this time. We'll go and save the changes. Still not quite enough. So to top up this week, just go back to that previous employee. It's an extra £1.80. And then our apprentice, who's now in their second year of the apprenticeship, now needs to be paid a higher minimum wage. So they're going up to the £10.18, which is what they would get for aged 21 to 22. So that's just to illustrate that if an automatic adjustment was made, you'll continue to be prompted to adjust it until you've set the defaults and entered those new default values in the enter payments screen. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the demo. Just to recap how that all works, the message appears if the employees are paid below minimum wage. And if you're using variable payments, you can select payment to adjust. Default rates can be updated in the employee record and also your pay element settings. And you can either reset your payments or enter that new default rate in the enter payment screen to stop that warning from coming up next time. I've got a page of useful links. So our knowledge base articles takes you through the steps that we've covered today. So applying the check, checking your pay element settings and updating your employees' rates. Also put some useful links to the gov.uk website on the national minimum wage guidance, both for employees and employers, and some useful information from ACAS as well there on the second link. So get a copy of the handout and you'll have those links to hand. Now, a bit before you all go, we have got a little bit of fun. We've put together a 4-question quiz on today's topic. So I'm going to give you the chance to join in and test your knowledge on this by using our polling feature. We won't tell you, we don't, so it's all anonymous. We don't record who got what answers right, but you will see the overall responses as a percentage. So we'll have a quick look at some of these questions now. And the first one I'm going to ask you is, at what age does an employee get the national living wage? So that poll should pop up on your screen. So what age is an employee entitled to the national living wage? Is it aged 22? Is it aged 23? Is it 24? Or is it 25? So you can select your answer on screen. Don't forget to submit it through. And once we've had about a minute, we'll close that poll down and we'll let you know how you got on. So age an employee gets the national living wage, is it 22 and older, 23 and older, 24 and older, or 25 and older? So we've got about 80% voted. So I'm going to share the results with you. And we've got 85% of you saying aged 23 is when an employee gets the national living wage, and you 85% were correct. So that is the age for national living wage. It is set to decrease to 21 from next April, and in the past it has been 25. But most of you got that one right at 23 years old. Okay, so on to question 2. Nice and simple, this one, hopefully. What is the current national living wage? So we know that's for employees aged 23 and above. Is the national living wage £9 per hour? Is it £9.50 per hour? Is it £10.25 per hour? Or is it £10.42? So you'll have seen this amount quite a lot in the demos. It is set to go above £11 an hour in 2024. But what is it currently with effect from April 2023? And we've got a good result on this one. We've had just over 70% of the votes in, so I will share those with you. And I'm happy to say that we have 100% answering £10.42, and 100% of you were correct. That is the current national living wage, £10.42 per hour. So well done to you all. Question 3 then. This is a bit of a product question. So where in Sage 50 Payroll can you find the current minimum wage rates? So if you were here at the start of the webinar, we showed you this. Where can you find the current minimum wage rates? Would you find them in the enter payment screen? Can they be found within the employee record in the pay elements section? Are minimum wage rates within company and pay elements? Or can you find those minimum wage rates within company and legislation? So loads of handy information available in this area, just to give you a clue. And with most of the votes in there, we will close and share the results. And 92% of you saying you can find them within company and legislation, and 92% of you have got that spot on. So even if you're not using minimum wage check, perhaps because your employees are paid a fixed salary, you can still check the minimum hourly rates from company and then legislation. So well done to those that got that right. And on to our final question. So this one, in Sage 50 Payroll, what type of payment can be automatically adjusted by the minimum wage check feature? So is it variable payments that can be automatically adjusted? Is it fixed payments? Is it global payments? Or is it factor? So what type of pay element can be adjusted by the minimum wage check? Variable, fixed, global, or factor? So a bit of a mix of answers on this one. Give you a few more seconds to cast your vote before we close that one down. Great, so this is what you voted. 78% of you think that variable payments can be adjusted automatically by the minimum wage check, 11% global and 11% factor. And the correct answer there is variable. So variable pay elements can be amended within the enter payment screen. That's where the minimum wage check runs. So that is the one that gets automatically adjusted. Partial credit if you say factored payment, because that will have a knock-on effect if the base payment is adjusted. But you won't be able to choose a factored payment as the one you want to adjust. You would have to choose the base payment, which will then feed in to the rate for the factored payment. And a global payment type, the only place to set the rate for that is within company and pay elements. So the minimum wage check would alert you if someone's being paid with the global payment and it's below minimum wage, but you won't have the option of adjusting that directly. So that's your quiz. Well done if you got 4 out of 4. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So we will stick around just to give you a final chance to submit any questions. And I'd also like to quickly run through the further support available. So if you think of something after you leave the webinar, a great place to look would be in our online help centre. So you can find that at sage.co.uk/help. You can also find it by clicking any of the help icons within Sage 50 Payroll. So from the search, you can search for keywords. You'll also find a link to our webinars, so you can see what other sessions are coming up and get yourself signed up to them. And if there's a webinar that you've missed recently and you want to watch the recording, you will also find the recordings from that webinar section. You'll also find our support guides, videos, and all of the options to get in touch with our support team should you need to contact them for any reason. So that's our help centre, sage.co.uk/help. Also, I'd like to tell you about Sage University, which is available free of charge at sageu.com. From here, once you've created your profile, you can dip into our e-learning courses. You can do online certification in your Sage software, and you can access a wealth of bite-sized learning as well on a variety of payroll topics, not just payroll. There's 50 accounts. All of the Sage software is available at sageu.com. So check that out if you'd like to work on your knowledge. That is available as a free resource. So that's your further support. We will stick around just for a few more minutes to make sure we've had the chance to answer any questions. So last chance to submit them in the Q&A if you'd like an answer sent through. And if you'd like to download our handouts, they are still available from the handouts icon. That's a piece of paper over on the right-hand side. We'll be sending you a follow-up email later on this afternoon, which will contain a link to the recording of this session and also a link to our survey that pops up as well when you exit the webinar. So any feedback that you may have is greatly appreciated. If you could spend a moment to complete the survey when you see that appear. So I'm just going to go on to mute for now. We'll make sure we've covered off all the questions, and then I'll come back when we are ready to say goodbye. So I'll speak to you soon. Hello again, and thanks for sticking around with us until the end there. It's been a quiet session today, so we haven't had many questions through. I think we just had one that's had a response. But I'd like to thank you for joining us at the session today. I hope you have found it useful. It's opened your eyes to a little known feature in the software. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute to complete any survey that you see as you leave, I would very much appreciate that. And do look out for your follow-up email arriving later today. So with that said, we're going to wrap things up. Thanks once again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars soon. So goodbye for now.